Have you ever been cursed? I'd hope not. And I would also assume that you have very little interest in being cursed this spooky season. Hello, my wonderfully curious minds. I'm V, and today I'll be talking about the top 5 scary Halloween curses you pray you never get. Number 5, King Candy. I'm sure that mostly everyone here loves candy, and I'm sure that everyone has childhood memories of walking through the dim streets on Halloween, seeking out as much candy as they possibly could. Well, this Halloween, I would urge you to share some of your candy. If not, you may meet an icy, chilling fate. This is the curse of King Candy, and ironically, the curse is enforced by a girl, Susie Bethlehem. Susie loved candy, so she loved Halloween. She would stuff her face as she walked from house to house, gnawing off crunchy pieces of freezing candy as she greedily stuffed it into her face. Susie would carry many king-sized pillowcases along with her each year, not returning home until every single bag was filled to the brim. But on her last Halloween, on her way home, Susie was met by some old friends. Her friends stole her candy and pushed her to the ground, then tied a pillowcase over her head and left her alone in the cold, dark night. Susie's hands were so numb from the cold that she wasn't even able to untie the pillowcase on her head. She couldn't shout for help because her throat began to freeze closed. The next morning, she was gone. All that was left was a pile of frosted candy wrappers. Every year since, reports of a figure walking through the streets on Halloween night have been common. The figure was described as wearing a pillowcase over its head, humming as though it is trying to ask for help, and leaving a trail of frosty candy wrappers wherever it goes. Many people have been found frozen still, surrounded by candy wrappers, which they swear they didn't eat. When asked what happened, they all confessed that they refused to give away their candy to a strange girl with a pillowcase over her head. Then a chill would run up their spine, and that was the last thing they remembered before waking up frozen. In the weeks later, they all began to act strange. They were filled with an insatiable hunger for just about anything. Candy was their favorite, but if that wasn't available, they would eat whatever was near: wood, dolls, toys, ice, inanimate objects, and in the most serious cases, they even resorted to human flesh. The common consensus suspects that every Halloween, Susie's ghost stalks the streets, searching for candy to fill her insatiable sweet tooth. She approaches homes and silently asks for candy. When she's denied her request, she ensures that they will meet the same fate as her, frozen, filled with a bottomless hunger for eternity. In recent years, people have even begun to place a piece of candy on their porch as a hopeful peace offering to please Susie. Number 4, tears of joy. A lot of people know how saddening it is to be teased or picked on, and they often wish that the person tormenting them would just disappear. Well, the tears of joy curse offers a terrifying solution to those who are victim to extreme torment. It all started with a girl named Joy. Joy was not well liked. She wasn't pretty, smart, funny, or confident. She stood out among her peers and family, who were all conventionally beautiful and sociable, which they reminded Joy of as often as they could, especially Marianne, Joy's younger sister. The only time Joy ever felt, well, joy was on Halloween. She would spend weeks planning and hand-making her costumes, just in preparation for her favorite holiday. Her 31st Halloween wasn't any different. Joy had made a gorgeous flowing dress, and purchased a ridiculously expensive crown, set with hundreds of diamonds. On the eve of this Halloween, Joy's sister showed up to her apartment, along with 2 of her friends. Marianne wanted to wear Joy's newly made costume, and when Joy refused, Marianne and her friends began to rip it apart, laughing maniacally while Joy screamed in horror. Joy wrestled her lavish crown from her sister and ran into the bathroom teary-eyed. Marianne began pounding on the door, screaming threats and insults at her sister. Joy's sadness tugged at her throat and she began letting out heaving sobs. Marianne laughed, mocking Joy's inflections and emotions. Joy cried for hours, sitting against the door with her hands over her ears, her eyes shut and her head buried in her knees. All she could think was, what I didn't have in beauty, I couldn't even make up in personality. What I didn't have in intelligence, I couldn't even make up in humor. The very emotion I was named for, I hardly even felt. After hours of hysteric crying, the strangest thing happened. Joy began to smile. She smiled while tears sunk into her lips and their salty taste settled on her tongue. She smiled as she realized her eyes were stuck shut from her tears. Then, Joy began to laugh. She laughed while her breaths became heavy. She laughed as puddles of tears formed around her. She laughed as she tore diamonds out of her expensive crown. She laughed as she placed them in her reddened hand, and she laughed as she placed them into her mouth. Joy's last breath was shallow and metallic. Her lungs and air pipe had been torn to shreds by diamonds, but she still smiled. When she was found, her sister said the smile on her face was the first time Joy had ever looked truly joyful. The next Halloween, Marianne was found in her bathroom, laying on the floor unmoving, puddles of tears surrounding her. Her face was stuck in a wide smile, and she had reddened diamonds falling out of her mouth. Since Joy's passing every Halloween, others who had tormented someone consistently have been found in the same horrifying state. Some have even summoned Joy to help them get rid of their tormentor. They stand in a pitch-dark bathroom, closing their eyes and holding a diamond in their hand while they repeat, "Tears of joy, mocking toy. Mary's end, morals bend." When their eyes opened, the diamond had disappeared, and then, on Halloween, their wish would come true. Number 3, growing up, growing down. Have you ever heard the saying, don't grow up too fast? Well, I'm sure you have. It's what adults always tell you when you're young, but no one ever really listens. Well, some don't have a choice, thanks to this curse. Growing up, growing down. Have you ever heard of Benjamin Buttons? Well, this curse is pretty similar, but somehow a lot scarier. The most well-known case is a man named Billy. Billy loved Halloween. He would dress up and trick-or-treat. He would go to parties and wear his costume as long as he possibly could. But this Halloween, Billy had been invited to a party, so he left his apartment at 8 p.m., 30 minutes after the party started. Billy stepped into the elevator and pressed the first floor button, but on his way down, the elevator stopped. The lights went out, and Billy woke up in his bed, but no, it wasn't his bed, but it was? It was his childhood bed. Billy stared at the posters on the wall, the medals he won in Pee-wee sports, and the bin of costumes. Billy had become young again. He assumed he'd just had a crazy dream, and the memories of him growing up were just a weird, long version of it. But as years passed and he went through his life, the strange memories were exact copies of what had already happened. He lived through every single event. When Billy finally reached the memory of his last grown-up Halloween, he stepped into the elevator, and again, Billy woke up in his childhood bed. This cycle repeated over and over, never ending and never changing. Billy tried hundreds of ways to end the cycle. He tried changing small details, making different choices, and avoiding the elevator completely. But without fail, on that Halloween at 8 p.m., he would be suddenly surrounded by darkness and then awaken in his childhood bed. The curse was created by Sarah Clover, a grieving mother who wished to relive her years with her deceased son. She located an ancient well which held an imprisoned demonic entity and asked for her wish to be granted. And hey, it was. The voice in the well granted her wish. She was able to relive all of her time with her son right from his birth, but she discovered that the ending never changed, and she later discovered there was no way to leave the loop. She began to lose her mind as she lived through her son's passing over and over again, overshadowing the previously cherished memories with hatred, regret, and resentment. She eventually went mad and begged the demon of the well for an escape. The demon agreed to let her out of the loop, on the condition that she would release him from his prison. Sarah agreed. She got a rope and lowered it down into the well, but she realized too late that the demon had tricked her. Once he'd climbed to the top of the rope, he grabbed Sarah by her wrist and threw her in, then filled the well with cement and dirt, trapping Sarah completely. Sarah didn't pass away. She lived. She lived through hundreds of years. She lived through wars and dynasties. She sat in the well, alone, her mind slipping even further into the madness with every passing day, year, and millennia. Buildings were built and destroyed above her. Soon, she began to drag people into a loop, hoping that they would find her and beg to escape, and like the demon, she would trick them and trade places. But time and time again, they retained their memories, and eventually, they went mad from living through the same years endlessly, never finding Sarah or even knowing about her, just suffering. So yeah, I'm gonna avoid ancient locations. I don't know exactly where this well is, but I'm certain that I don't want to go anywhere near it. Number 2, whispering silence. The curse of whispering silence is definitely not a blessing. Have you ever gotten so overwhelmed that your head is full of buzzing thoughts and it's just so loud that you feel like screaming? No? Okay, just me then. Well, imagine that. That's the result of the whispering silence curse. In Romania, a woman named Elena was famous for her gift of communicating with the dead. People from far and wide would come to see her, paying massive amounts of money for her services, praising her heightened ability, and one extremely grateful client even made her a gorgeous diamond and amethyst necklace, which she would wear every day. But not everyone was happy. You see, her sister Julia was very jealous of Elena, and she wished to live her life. So Julia made a plan. While Elena was sleeping, Julia would sneak into her room and pour a corrosive mixture into her throat and ears. She did this for days and weeks, and Elena got sicker and sicker each day. She started to lose her hearing, then her vision, then her voice. Within a week, Elena had lost her sense of hearing and her eyesight. Within a month, Elena lost her voice and taste. Within 2 months, Elena had passed away. Elena had suspected that she was being poisoned, but she trusted her sister, so she never confronted her. Julia began to go to Elena's husband's house, Andre, daily, offering support, cooking, and cleaning. Eventually, Andre invited her to move in, and the two began a romantic relationship, eventually deciding to marry. Julia was living the life she always wanted, her sister's life. Julia decided to wear Elena's wedding dress, paired with Elena's necklace, which she'd been saving for the wedding. On the morning of the wedding, Julia dressed in the white dress, pulled on a pair of lacy gloves, and secured a veil over her face. She grabbed her intricate bouquet of flowers and placed the necklace around her neck. As she walked down the aisle, she started to become faint. Her vision blurred and her ears rang. Her neck burned as her dizzied body fell to the floor. She frantically looked around the grand venue, seeing crowds of people rush towards her. Julia's ears rang so loud she couldn't hear anyone's voice. She ran to her dressing room and rushed to the mirror. She felt a stinging pain on her chest, so she pulled the necklace aside and noticed a red, burning rash had appeared in its shape. Then the ringing stopped. "Hello, Julia. I know what you did." Julia recognized her sister's voice immediately. For the rest of Julia's life, she couldn't hear anything besides her sister's voice. She tried to take the necklace off often, even tried to cut it and melt it, but nothing worked. It was stuck until she took her last breath. The necklace has had hundreds of owners since, each who met a grisly end. Each became deaf, but they heard hundreds of overlapping undead voices inside their head. This one's scary. Not being able to hear anyone except for the angry spirits of past owners of a necklace is so scary. Definitely avoid wearing the jewelry of people you've scorned. Number 1. Mother Dearest and Father Fearest. This curse falls in the genre of body-snatching curses. Every Halloween, it's said that the ghosts of 2 grieving parents now hunt for 2 parents to possess each Halloween. Margot and John Lewitt were well known in their neighborhood. The pair had taken their own lives years before, after their 2 sons went missing while trick-or-treating. Margot and John had blamed themselves. Margot and John weren't big fans of family outings or commercial holidays, so they told their sons to go trick-or-treating with a group of friends, and that was the last time they saw them. They took their own lives the very next Halloween. Stacy and Mark Hubert moved into the neighborhood 2 months after the Lewitts passed on. They had 2 sons who they loved very much. They were a perfectly happy, perfect family. They would all have family dinners, they would go on hikes and bike rides together every weekend. The neighborhood welcomed the lovely family with open arms. The Huberts fit in perfectly, and they were perfect until suddenly they weren't. On their first Halloween, Stacy and Mark let their sons go trick-or-treating on their own. The sons returned home later that night, finding that their house was empty and that the door was wide open. The 2 called the police and alerted them that their parents were missing. This was a high-income neighborhood, so obviously the police showed up immediately. Stacy and Mark were found standing in front of the now abandoned Lewitt house, silently staring at the run-down, overgrown property. The police informed them that their sons were waiting for them at home. The pair walked back home and went straight to bed, not even acknowledging their 2 sons. Days went by without family dinners, weeks went by without hikes or bike rides, and months went by without decorations on the house. Neighbors noticed the startling shift in the Huberts, but when they asked, Mark and Stacy would just stare at them. The pair spent all their time just looking at the Lewitt house. Hours and hours were spent. Every spare moment was dedicated to gazing at the home. Now, I'm sure you've figured out what happened to Mark and Stacy. You see, Mark and Stacy hadn't been themselves because they weren't themselves. They'd been affected by the curse of Mother Dearest and Father Fearest. The ghosts of Margot and John Lewitt would spend their Halloween evenings searching for parents who had not trick-or-treated with their children, and they would punish them for the entire calendar year until the next Halloween. Next Halloween, when they would move on to the next pair of neglectful parents. I mean, they were the ones that let their sons go out alone, so I don't even know. Ghosts aren't rational, I guess. The Lewitt boys have still never been found. Some suspect foul play, while others believe that the cycle began even before the Lewitt family. What do you think? Well, that brings us to the end of today's video. Have you heard of these curses? Which do you think is the scariest? Let me know in the comments or send me a DM. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed the video, and most importantly, I hope you learned something. Stay curious. Bye!